The dust swirled around Faith Sullivan as she stood before her husband's grave, refusing to believe what everyone in Copper Creek had already accepted as truth. The year was 1878, and at 24 they had branded her a widow far too quickly for her liking. 6 months ago, her husband Michael had ridden out with a cattle drive and never returned. The search party found only his blood-soaked shirt and hat beside the river, concluding he'd been attacked by bandits and his body washed away. "They're wrong, Michael," Faith whispered, adjusting the black veil that framed her delicate features. "I would know if you were truly gone. I would feel it in my heart." The townsfolk called her pitiful, delusional even, but Faith wouldn't accept the empty grave before her. She placed a single wildflower atop the marker and turned back toward town, her black mourning dress catching the wind as she walked. Copper Creek, Wyoming territory, sat nestled between rolling hills and the promise of prosperity. The dusty main street housed all the necessities: a general store, saloon, small bank, and sheriff's office. Faith had inherited the modest homestead she'd shared with Michael along with debts she hadn't known existed. "Mrs. Sullivan," Sheriff Adams nodded as she passed. "Fine day." "It is, Sheriff," she offered a small smile, knowing full well the looks of pity that followed her through town. "Faith," Martha Green called from the general store porch, "come in for tea tomorrow. My Beatrice misses your company." "I'll try, Martha, thank you." Faith kept walking head high despite the whispers. "Poor thing," she heard someone say. "Still can't accept he's gone, living in that house all alone, thinking he'll walk through the door any day now." Faith quickened her pace. The townsfolk meant well, but their constant reminders of her supposed widowhood grated on her nerves. She turned down the lane toward home when she spotted something unusual: a rider approaching from the east, not the usual direction of travelers. The man sat tall in the saddle, dusty from the trail. As he drew closer, Faith could make out broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest, a weathered face partially hidden by the shadow of his hat. He rode slowly, seemingly in no hurry, leading a second horse that carried supplies. Faith paused at her gate, curious about the stranger. Copper Creek didn't see many visitors this time of year. The rider noticed her watching and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, madam," he called. "Afternoon," Faith replied, her hand on the gate latch. He pulled his horse to a stop. "I'm looking for work in these parts. Might you know who's hiring?" Faith studied him. He had kind eyes blue as the summer sky and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. His clothes were well worn but clean, and the way he handled his horse spoke of experience. "The Carson Ranch might be," she answered. "It's about 5 miles west of town." The stranger nodded. "Much obliged." He hesitated, then added, "Name's Blake Reynolds, madam, just come from Montana Territory, Faith Sullivan." She didn't add widow, as most expected her to these days. Blake's eyes flicked to her black dress, then back to her face. Understanding crossed his features, but to Faith's surprise, he didn't offer the usual condolences. "Fine piece of land you have," he said instead, nodding toward the small homestead behind her. The 2-room cabin stood proudly amid a garden that had seen better days, and a small barn housed her milk cow and 2 chickens. "It's enough for me," Faith replied. "Could use some mending on that roof," Blake observed. "Storm season's coming." Faith bristled slightly. "I'm aware, I'll manage." A smile tugged at the corner of Blake's mouth. "No doubt you will, Mrs. Sullivan." He tipped his hat again. "Hope to see you around town." With that, he clicked to his horse and continued toward Copper Creek. Faith watched him go, trying to ignore the strange fluttering in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd spoken to anyone who didn't look at her with pity. Faith pushed open her gate and walked up the path to her front door. The homestead seemed quieter than usual today. She'd managed to keep it going these past 6 months, but it grew harder every day. The garden needed tending, the roof leaked in 3 places, and the well pump required strength she sometimes couldn't muster. But she wouldn't sell. Not while there was a chance Michael might return. That evening, as Faith prepared her simple supper of beans and cornbread, a knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. She grabbed the shotgun Michael had taught her to use and approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Blake Reynolds, madam." From earlier today, Faith frowned, setting the shotgun aside but keeping it within reach as she opened the door. Blake stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat apologetic. "Mr. Reynolds, what brings you here? Thought you might be needing this." He held up a small burlap sack. Carson Ranch wasn't hiring, but the general store was selling fresh eggs. "Noticed you only had 2 hens." Faith stared at the sack, then at Blake. "Why would you bring me eggs? Call it a neighborly gesture. I'm staying at the boarding house in town for a spell." He offered the sack. "No strings attached, Mrs. Sullivan." Faith hesitated before accepting the gift. "Thank you, that's unexpected." "Sometimes the unexpected things are worth accepting." Blake's smile was gentle. "I won't keep you from your supper." As he turned to leave, Faith found herself saying, "I have plenty of beans and cornbread if you're hungry." Blake paused, surprise evident on his face. "That's mighty kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's just food, Mr. Reynolds. And I rarely have company these days that doesn't come bearing casseroles and condolences." Understanding flashed in his eyes. "In that case, beans and cornbread sounds fine." Faith led him inside the modest cabin. A small table sat near the hearth where a pot of beans bubbled. The interior was clean but sparse, a testament to Faith's determination to maintain what she had. "Have a seat," she offered, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at the table while she fetched another plate. Blake sat, removing his hat and placing it on his knee. "Nice place." "It's home," Faith replied simply, serving the food. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Blake spoke. "How long have you lived in Copper Creek, Mrs. Sullivan?" 3 years. "My husband and I moved here from Kansas after we married." Faith didn't know why she was sharing this with a stranger, but there was something about Blake that put her at ease. "And your husband?" He left the question hanging. Faith stiffened. "Is missing, not dead, despite what everyone believes." Blake's expression remained neutral. "Missing how long?" 6 months. He was on a cattle drive. There was an attack by the river." Faith pushed her beans around her plate. "They found his shirt and hat, both bloodied, assumed he was killed and washed downstream. But you don't believe it." Faith looked up, expecting to see the familiar pity or disbelief. Instead, Blake's eyes held simple curiosity. "No," she said firmly. "I don't. Michael was a strong swimmer, and I would know if he was gone. I would feel it." Blake nodded slowly. "The heart knows things others don't." "Exactly." Faith felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For months, no one had validated her feelings. The sheriff stopped searching after 2 weeks. The reverend held a funeral with an empty casket. Everyone started calling me Widow Sullivan, as if saying it enough would make me accept it. "Must be hard, standing your ground when everyone thinks otherwise." "It is." Faith met his gaze, "but I'm not giving up on him." Blake studied her for a long moment. "Loyalty like that is rare, Mrs. Sullivan." "Faith," she said suddenly, "if you're going to sit at my table and eat my cornbread, you might as well call me Faith." A smile spread across his face. "Faith it is, then." After supper, Blake insisted on washing the dishes while Faith put away the leftover food. "Carson Ranch may not be hiring," he said as he dried a plate, "but I heard the livery stable needs help. I'll try there tomorrow." "Samuel at the livery is fair, works hard himself." Faith took the dried plate from him. "Where will you go if there's no work here?" "Wherever the trail leads, I suppose." Blake handed her the last cup. "I've been drifting since the war, worked ranches in Texas, Montana, even did a stint mining in Colorado." "The war you fought?" Faith couldn't help but look at him with new eyes. He didn't seem old enough to have fought in the war between the states. Last year of it, was barely 18. Blake's expression grew distant. "Came home to Texas to find my family gone. Fever took them while I was away. Nothing left to keep me there, so I started moving." "I'm sorry about your family," Faith said softly. Blake shrugged. "It was a long time ago. I've made my peace with it." He reached for his hat. "Thank you for supper, Faith. Best meal I've had in weeks." "Thank you for the eggs," she replied, walking him to the door, "and the company." He paused at the threshold. "Your roof really does need mending before the rains come. I could help with that if you'd allow it." Pride made Faith want to refuse, but practicality won out. "I can't pay much." Another supper would be payment enough. Blake settled his hat on his head. "Day after tomorrow, I'll bring supplies." Faith nodded. "Day after tomorrow." She watched him walk down the path to where he'd tethered his horse. There was something about Blake Reynolds that left her feeling both unsettled and oddly comforted. For the first time in months, Faith felt something other than grief or determination. She felt seen. The next morning, Faith headed into town for supplies. The general store was busy with the usual Saturday crowd. "Faith, dear," Martha Green called from behind the counter. "How lovely to see you out and about." "Good morning, Martha." Faith handed over her short list coffee, sugar, and a spool of thread. "Did you meet our new visitor?" Martha asked as she gathered the items. "Handsome cowboy staying at Widow Jensen's boarding house." "Mr. Reynolds, yes, briefly." Faith didn't mention the shared supper. "Sheriff Adams says he's asking about work. Seems respectable enough." Martha leaned closer. "And single from what I hear," Faith sighed. "Martha, you know I'm not." "I know, dear." Martha patted her hand, "just making conversation." "That'll be 63 cents. As Faith counted out the money, the store's bell jingled. Blake entered, nodding politely to those inside. He spotted Faith and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said formally, aware of the watching eyes. "Mr. Reynolds," Faith replied with equal formality, though a small smile played at her lips. "Any luck with the livery?" "Starting Monday," Blake confirmed. "Samuel needs help with the spring shoeing." "Wonderful news." Faith gathered her purchases. "Good day to you, then." Blake stepped aside to let her pass. "Good day, madam." Outside, Faith breathed deeply. The town's interest in the new arrival would distract them from her for a while, which was a welcome relief. As promised, Blake appeared at Faith's homestead 2 days later with supplies for roof repairs. He worked steadily through the morning, refusing Faith's offers to help. "Been doing this kind of work since I was 12, he assured her. "You tend to your garden and I'll handle the roof." By midday, Faith had weeded her vegetable patch and was preparing lunch when she heard a commotion from above. A clatter, followed by a thud and a muffled curse. She rushed outside to find Blake sitting on the ground, grimacing. "Are you hurt?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Just my pride," he grunted, though he winced when he tried to stand. "And maybe my ankle." Faith helped him inside and insisted on examining the injury. Blake's ankle was already swelling, sprained, not broken, she determined, gently probing the area. "You're lucky. But you won't be climbing any roofs for a few days." "The job's not finished," Blake protested. "It will wait." Faith wrapped his ankle with strips of clean cloth. "You need to rest it. Samuel's expecting me tomorrow. I'll speak with him, he'll understand." Faith stood. "You can take my bed tonight, I'll use the chair." Blake shook his head firmly. "I'm not taking your bed, Faith. I can make it back to town. On that ankle, don't be foolish." Faith crossed her arms. "People talk enough about me already. If word gets out I let an injured man ride back to town when I had a perfectly good bed available, they'll think I've truly lost my mind." A reluctant smile tugged at Blake's lips. "You're a stubborn woman, Faith Sullivan, so I've been told." Faith turned to the stove. "Lunch is nearly ready." Despite Blake's protests, Faith insisted he stay the night. She made up the bed with clean linens while he sat at the table, his injured foot propped on a stool. "Tell me about your husband," Blake said as they finished their evening meal of rabbit stew. Faith looked up, surprised. No one asked about Michael anymore, they only spoke of him in the past tense, with solemn nods and hushed tones. "What would you like to know?" "Whatever you'd like to share." Faith found herself talking more than she had in months. She told Blake how she'd met Michael at a church social in Kansas, how they'd married within 6 months, and their dreams of building a cattle ranch in Wyoming. "He has a laugh that fills a room," she said, smiling at the memory, "and he whistles when he works. Same tune over and over drives me to distraction sometimes." Blake listened, making no comment on her use of present tense. "He's good with animals, gentle, the complete opposite of his father." Faith's smile faded. "His father never approved of me. Said Michael could have done better than a schoolteacher's daughter with no dowry to speak of." "The old man sounds like a fool," Blake remarked. Faith laughed softly. "That's what Michael said, almost word for word." As night fell, Faith helped Blake to the bed, ignoring his continued protests. She settled herself in the rocking chair near the hearth, a quilt pulled around her shoulders. "This isn't right." Blake said from the darkness of the bedroom alcove. "Sleep, Mr. Reynolds. The ankle needs rest." Faith heard him sigh but make no further argument. She stared into the dying embers of the fire, listening to the rhythmic sound of Blake's breathing as it slowed into sleep. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel so empty. Morning brought a knock at the door. Faith, already up and preparing breakfast, opened it to find Sheriff Adams standing there looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Faith," he said, hat in hand. Noticed Reynolds' horse still tethered out back, wanted to make sure everything was all right. Faith fought the urge to slam the door in his face. "Mr. Reynolds injured his ankle helping with my roof. I offered him a place to rest overnight." The sheriff's eyes darted past her to the interior of the cabin. "That's so, and where did he sleep, if you don't mind my asking?" "I do mind, Sheriff," Faith replied coldly. "But if it will prevent unnecessary gossip, Mr. Reynolds took my bed while I slept in the chair, as any decent person would arrange it." Sheriff Adams had the grace to look embarrassed. "Just doing my duty, Faith. Town looks after its own." "Then perhaps the town could look after me by respecting my privacy." Blake appeared behind her, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from a broom handle. "Morning, Sheriff. Something I can help you with." The sheriff took in Blake's disheveled appearance and obviously injured ankle. "No, just checking in. How'd you hurt yourself?" "Carelessness on my part. Slipped on a loose shingle." Blake's tone was pleasant but firm. "Mrs. Sullivan has been kind enough to offer aid, despite having her own challenges to manage." Sheriff Adams nodded slowly. "Well, if you need the doctor, I've tended worse," Faith interrupted. "Now if you'll excuse us, breakfast is waiting." After the sheriff left, Blake settled himself at the table while Faith served oatmeal and coffee. "That will set tongues wagging," she muttered. "Does it bother you?" Blake asked. "What people think," Faith considered the question. "It used to, now I find I care less and less." She sat across from him. "What about you? You're the one with a reputation to establish in town." "My reputation is my own business," Blake said simply, "and I've never put much stock in gossip." Faith studied him over her coffee cup. There was a steadiness to Blake that reminded her of Michael, but something else too, a quiet confidence that came from facing life's hardest blows and surviving them. "I'll hitch the wagon after breakfast," she decided. "Take you back to town so you can rest properly at the boarding house." "I can ride, you'll tear those ligaments worse," Faith cut him off. "The wagon it is." Blake's mouth twitched. "Yes, madam." Faith's wagon drew stairs as she drove down Copper Creek's main street with Blake seated beside her. She ignored the curious looks, stopping in front of the boarding house. "I can manage from here," Blake insisted. "I'll help you inside," Faith replied, setting the brake. Widow Jensen opened the door before they reached it, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mr. Reynolds." "Sheriff Adams mentioned you'd had an accident." "Nothing serious, Mrs. Jensen." Blake balanced on his good foot. "Just need to rest it a few days." Of course, of course." The older woman's eyes darted between Blake and Faith. "Mrs. Sullivan, how kind of you to bring him." "It was the least I could do after his help with my roof." Faith kept her voice even, refusing to feed the woman's obvious curiosity. "Good day, Mrs. Jensen. Mr. Reynolds, I hope your ankle heals quickly." She turned to go, but Blake caught her hand. "Thank you, Faith." The simple touch sent warmth up her arm. "You're welcome." Over the next week, Faith found herself thinking of Blake more than she cared to admit. She busied herself with spring planting and mending clothes for extra income, trying to ignore the empty spaces in her days. On Sunday, she attended church as usual, sitting alone in her regular pew. She noticed Blake seated at the back, his injured foot propped on a small stool. He nodded when their eyes met, and Faith found herself smiling in return. After the service, Reverend Phillips approached her. "Faith, could I have a word?" She followed him to his office, already suspecting what he wanted to discuss. "The town is talking," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "The town is always talking, Reverend," he sighed. "Faith, it's been 6 months," your continued. "Insistence that Michael might return is concerning enough. But now taking in a stranger, I did not take him in," Faith interrupted. "He was injured helping me. I offered Christian charity, nothing more, of course." The Reverend steepled his fingers, but appearances matter. You're a young widow, I am not a widow, Faith said firmly, and I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs. Faith, his voice softened, we all loved Michael, but accepting his death is part of healing. With all due respect, Reverend, I don't need to heal from something that hasn't happened. Faith stood. Now, if you'll excuse me. She left the church with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly. Near the general store, she spotted Blake talking with Samuel from the livery. He saw her and excused himself, limping over with the aid of a proper crutch. Faith, he greeted her. You left church in a hurry. Reverend Phillips had concerns about my immortal soul, she replied dryly. How's the ankle? Better. Doc says another week before I can put full weight on it. Blake fell into step beside her as she walked toward her wagon. Samuel's holding my job. That's good news. Blake helped her into the wagon, moving with surprising agility despite his injury. I was wondering if I might call on you tomorrow, finish that roof repair. You're still healing, Faith protested. I can supervise while you do the climbing, Blake suggested with a grin. After all, you're the one who has to live with the leaks. Despite herself, Faith laughed. Fine, tomorrow afternoon. As she drove home, Faith realized it was the first time she'd truly laughed since Michael disappeared. The thought brought a pang of guilt. Was she betraying him by finding moments of happiness, by enjoying Blake's company? But another part of her, a quiet voice that had been growing stronger, whispered that Michael would want her to laugh, to live fully while she waited for him. The next day, Blake arrived as promised, bringing additional supplies and his easy manner. True to his word, he supervised while Faith did the actual repairs, calling instructions from the ground. You're a natural, he called as she hammered down the last shingle. Ever consider a career in roofing? I'll add it to my list of options, Faith replied, making her way carefully back to the ladder. As she descended, her foot slipped on the third rung. Faith gasped, losing her grip, but before she could fall, strong hands caught her waist. I've got you, Blake said, his voice close to her ear. Faith found herself pressed against his chest, her heart hammering from the near fall and the unexpected proximity. She looked up into Blake's face, suddenly aware of how blue his eyes were, how the sun had bronzed his skin. Thank you, she murmured, stepping back. Blake's hands lingered at her waist for a moment before he released her. Couldn't have my supervisor taking a tumble. Faith smoothed her skirts, trying to calm her racing pulse. Well, the roof is fixed, no more leaks, one less worry for you. Blake's expression grew serious. Faith, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Her stomach tightened. Oh, I've been asking around town about your husband. He held up a hand when she started to speak. Not to pry, but to help. If he's out there, maybe there are clues people missed. Hope flared in Faith's chest. What did you find out? The cattle drive was headed to Cheyenne. The attack happened at Blackwater River, about 30 miles south of here. Blake's eyes held her steadily. 3 men died, identified by their belongings. 4 others were never found, presumed dead when their personal effects were recovered, but no bodies. Michael was one of the 4, Faith said, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake nodded. I've been thinking if he was injured, not killed, he might have washed downstream. There are settlements along that river, trading posts. He could have been found by someone who didn't know who he was, or if he was hurt badly enough. Faith couldn't finish the thought. He might not remember who he is, Blake completed gently. It happens sometimes. I saw it in the war, men with head injuries forgetting everything, even their own names. Faith pressed a hand to her mouth. The possibility had never occurred to her. The sheriff didn't check downstream. He only searched the area near the attack. I'd like to look for you, Blake said. Follow the river, ask at settlements. It's a long shot, but I'm coming with you, Faith interrupted. Blake's eyebrows rose. Faith, it's dangerous country and there's no guarantee he's my husband. If there's a chance he's out there, confused or injured, I need to be the one to find him. Faith's voice was steel. You can come with me, Mr. Reynolds, or I'll go alone. A slow smile spread across Blake's face. I had a feeling you'd say that. 2 days later, Faith had made arrangements for her neighbor's daughter to tend her animals and garden. Blake had purchased supplies and secured 2 good horses from Samuel. They would leave at first light. That evening, Faith sat on her porch, watching the sun set on what might be her last night at the homestead for some time. The possibility of finding Michael filled her with equal parts hope and dread. Hope that he was alive, dread that he might not be the man she remembered, or worse, that they'd find proof of his death after all. A horse approached, and Faith recognized Blake's silhouette against the darkening sky. "Thought you'd be resting before our journey," he said, dismounting and joining her on the porch. "Too much on my mind for sleep." Faith made room for him on the step. "You didn't have to check on me. Wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind." Blake settled beside her, his leg brushing against her skirts. "It won't be an easy journey." "I haven't changed my mind." Faith looked out at the land she and Michael had worked so hard to make their own. "This place was our dream. I need to know if he's still part of it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely. Stars emerged, brilliant against the black canvas of the Wyoming sky. "Faith," Blake said finally, his voice low, "I need you to consider something before we leave." She turned to look at him, noting the serious set of his jaw. "What is it? If we find proof that Michael is truly gone, what will you do?" The question hit her like a physical blow. For 6 months, Faith had refused to consider this possibility, clinging to the belief that Michael lived. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. Blake nodded slowly. "And if we find him alive, but changed, if he doesn't remember you," Faith's throat tightened, "then I'll help him remember. We'll start again." "You have tremendous faith, Mrs. Sullivan." Blake's use of her formal name emphasized the gravity of his words. "It's one of the things I admire most about you." Something in his tone made Faith's heart beat faster. "You hardly know me, Mr. Reynolds. I know enough." His eyes held hers in the darkness. "Enough to know that whatever happens on this journey, I want to help you face it." Faith felt a confusing mixture of gratitude and guilt. Why would you go to such lengths for a stranger?" Blake was quiet for so long that Faith thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because 6 months ago, I was pulled half dead from that same river by a Shoshone hunting party, with no memory of who I was or how I got there." Faith's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "My memory returned 2 months ago in pieces at first, then more clearly." Blake's hands tightened on his knees. "I wasn't in that cattle drive, Faith. I was traveling north when I was attacked by the same bandits. They took everything I had, shot me, and left me for dead in the river." "Then how did you know about Michael, about the attack?" "I heard about it when I reached the first settlement. People were talking about the massacre, about the missing men." Blake met her eyes steadily. "I know what it is to be lost, Faith, to have no one searching for you. I couldn't bear the thought of another person experiencing that, especially not someone's husband." Faith studied his face in the dim light, seeing the sincerity there. "So when you came to Copper Creek?" "I came looking for information about the attack, yes. But then I met you, standing at your gate in your widow's clothes, refusing to believe what everyone told you." A small smile touched his lips. "And I thought maybe you were right." Faith's mind whirled with this new information. "You never said anything?" "What should I have said?" "Hello, I nearly died in the same place as your husband. Would you like me to help you look for him?" Blake shook his head. "I needed to earn your trust first." Faith rose and moved to the edge of the porch, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know what to think, Blake." He stood but kept his distance. "I understand if you'd rather make this journey without me now, but my offer stands. I want to help you find the truth, whatever it may be." Faith turned to face him. In the weeks since his arrival, Blake had become someone she trusted, someone whose company she valued. The thought of continuing without him left her feeling hollow. "We leave at dawn," she said finally. As planned, relief washed over Blake's features. "Thank you." As he mounted his horse to return to town, Faith called after him. "Blake, thank you for telling me the truth." He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness. Dawn broke clear and cool as Faith finished loading her saddlebags. She'd slept little, her mind too full of Blake's revelation and the journey ahead. A small part of her wondered if she was making a terrible mistake leaving the safety of Copper Creek to chase what might be a ghost, but a larger part knew she could never truly live until she had answers. Blake arrived precisely at dawn, leading a packhorse laden with supplies. His face was serious as he helped secure the last of Faith's belongings. "Ready?" he asked. Faith took one last look at the homestead. "Ready." They rode south at a steady pace, following the trail that would eventually lead to the river where Michael had disappeared. Blake was quiet, giving Faith space with her thoughts. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "We should reach the river by tomorrow afternoon," Blake said, studying the map he'd spread on a flat rock. "There's a trapper's cabin about 10 miles ahead where we can spend the night." Faith nodded, picking at her food. "Blake, there's something I've been wondering." "What's that?" "If your memory only returned 2 months ago, what were you doing before that? Where were you?" Blake refolded the map carefully. "The Shoshone who found me took me to their camp. I was badly wounded, fever, infection. Their healer saved my life. When I recovered enough, I stayed with them, helped with hunting, repairs. They called me man with no past." A small smile touched his lips. "Not very original, but accurate. And when your memory returned, I thanked them for their kindness and left to find my way back to whatever life I had before." Blake met her gaze. "That's when I heard about the cattle drive attack. It happened not far from where I was found." Faith absorbed this information. "So you understand what Michael might be going through if he's alive?" "I do." Blake's voice was gentle. "The confusion, the fear, the desperate need to remember who you are. Will you tell me about the moment you remembered?" Blake was quiet for a long moment. It wasn't one moment. More like pieces of a puzzle slowly falling into place. A smell that triggered a memory of my mother's kitchen. The sound of a particular bird that reminded me of mornings on my father's ranch. He paused. "Your name actually was significant." Faith looked up, startled. "My name?" "Faith was my mother's name." Blake's eyes grew distant. "When you introduced yourself that first day, something shifted. It wasn't recognition exactly, but a feeling of rightness, like the world made sense again for a moment." Faith felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad my name helped you find yourself." Blake's smile was tender. "In more ways than you know." They reached the trapper's cabin as dusk was falling. It was a simple one-room structure, abandoned for the season but solid enough to provide shelter. Blake checked it thoroughly for unwanted animal visitors before declaring it safe. "It's not the Copper Creek Hotel, but it'll keep us dry," he said, lighting the small iron stove with kindling he'd gathered. Faith spread her bedroll on one side of the cabin while Blake took the other, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "Tell me about him," Blake said as they sat near the stove, eating beans he'd heated. "Michael, I mean, what kind of man is he?" Faith smiled at the use of present tense. "Kind, hardworking. He has dreams bigger than our little homestead, wants to build a proper ranch someday, raise fine horses." Her smile faded. "His father was a harsh man. Michael promised himself he'd never be like that." "Sounds like a good man." "He is." Faith stirred her beans absently. "We were trying to start a family when he left. I thought I might be expecting, but—" She trailed off, then looked up at Blake. "Sorry, that's probably more than you wanted to know. No need to apologize." Blake's voice was soft. "It helps to understand what you're searching for." "Who you're searching for?" Faith studied him across the small space. "What about you? Was there someone waiting when you lost your memory?" Blake shook his head. "No, I was engaged once, years ago. She died of typhoid before we could marry. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Blake set his empty plate aside. "I've been on my own since then. Until the Shoshone found me, I hadn't stayed in one place for more than a few months at a time." "And now, after we find Michael, what will you do?" Blake considered the question. "I'm not sure I like Copper Creek. Might stay on if there's work." The thought of Blake remaining in town brought Faith a surprising sense of comfort. "I think you'd fit in well there." Their eyes met across the small cabin, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, unexpected but undeniable. Blake looked away first. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Faith nodded and slipped into her bedroll, turning her back to give him privacy. She listened to his movements as he banked the fire and settled down for the night. "Blake," she said into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. Sleep well, Faith." Morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. They packed quickly and continued south, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the river. By mid-afternoon, Blake pointed to a line of cottonwood trees in the distance. The river's just beyond those trees. The attack happened about a mile downstream from where we'll reach it. Faith's heart hammered in her chest. For 6 months she'd clung to hope without proof. Now she might finally find answers. They dismounted at the river's edge, tethering the horses to a sturdy tree. The Blackwater lived up to its name, dark, fast-moving water that curved through the landscape like a great snake. The men were ambushed here, Blake said, leading Faith along the bank. They were moving the cattle across at a shallow point when the bandits attacked from both sides. Faith scanned the peaceful scene, trying to imagine the chaos and violence that had occurred. Where did they find Michael's things? Blake pointed to a sandy area near a bend in the river. According to what I heard, his hat and shirt were caught on branches there, bloodied, torn. Faith approached the spot slowly. Nothing remained to indicate the tragedy nature had reclaimed the scene months ago. If he went into the river, the current would have carried him that way. Blake gestured downstream. There's a trading post about 15 miles downriver. If someone found him alive, that's likely where they would have taken him. Then that's where we go next, Faith said, her voice stronger than she felt. They camped that night within sight of the river, neither speaking much as they prepared their simple meal. Faith found herself listening to the water, wondering if it held secrets about Michael's fate. Blake watched her from across the fire. First thing tomorrow, we'll follow the river to the trading post, should reach it by midday if we make good time. Faith nodded, then surprised herself by asking, "What if we don't find anything, Blake? What if this is another dead end?" "Then we keep looking." Blake's voice was firm. "As long as you want to search, I'll help you." Faith felt tears prick behind her eyes at his steadfast support. "Why are you doing this, truly?" Blake was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Because I know what it is to be lost, to have no one searching." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "And because I've come to care for you, Faith, your happiness matters to me." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. "I care for you too," she admitted quietly, "and that frightens me, I know." Blake didn't move closer, respecting the invisible boundary between them. "Whatever happens, Faith, I want you to find peace, with or without me in your life." Sleep came fitfully that night, with dreams of rushing water and faces just beyond recognition. Faith woke at first light, finding Blake already up and preparing coffee. "You look like you've been awake for hours," she observed, accepting the tin cup he offered. "Couldn't sleep much." Blake's eyes were tired but alert. "Thought I'd get an early start." They rode out as soon as they'd eaten, following the river's winding course. The day grew warm, the sun beating down on them as they traveled. By midday, as Blake had predicted, they spotted smoke rising from chimneys. "The trading post," he confirmed. Fort Blackwater was less a fort than a collection of sturdy buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. A small settlement had grown around it, perhaps 20 structures in all, housing those who worked at the post and the occasional trapper or traveler. They approached the main gate where a grizzled man with a shotgun eyed them suspiciously. "State your business," he called. "Looking for information," Blake replied. "And supplies." The man grunted. "Information's free if we have it. Supple'll cost you." Inside, the trading post bustled with activity. A large central building housed the actual trading operation, while smaller structures served as housing, storage, and what appeared to be a crude saloon. Blake helped Faith dismount. "Let's start at the main store. The trader will know if any survivors were brought here." The interior of the trading post was crowded with goods furs stacked in one corner, barrels of flour and salt in another, shelves of tools, ammunition, and various sundries lining the walls. A heavy-set man with an impressive beard stood behind a rough-hewn counter. "Afternoon," he greeted them. "What can I get you?" "Information, if you have it," Blake said. "About 6 months ago, there was an attack on a cattle drive near the river crossing upstream. We're looking for one of the missing men." The trader's expression grew serious. I remember, terrible business, 4 men never accounted for." Faith stepped forward. "One of them was my husband, Michael Sullivan, dark hair, tall, with a small scar above his right eye." The trader shook his head slowly. No one like that was brought here, madam. Sorry to say, Faith's hope dimmed. Are you certain he might have been badly injured, perhaps not able to identify himself? Only survivor brought here after that attack was nearly dead when they found him. Fellow with light brown hair, no scar that I recall. The trader stroked his beard thoughtfully. Dr. Finch tended him, might want to speak with him, he'd remember better than me. Faith and Blake exchanged a glance. Where can we find Dr. Finch? Blake asked. Small cabin at the edge of settlement. Green door. They found the doctor's residence easily enough, a neat cabin with the promised green door and a small sign identifying it as both home and medical practice. A tall, thin man with spectacles answered their knock. Yes, someone injured, Dr. Finch, Blake inquired. We're hoping you might have information about a survivor from the cattle drive attack 6 months ago. The doctor studied them with interest. You're not the first to come asking, who is it you're looking for? My husband, Faith said. Michael Sullivan. Dr. Finch's expression softened. You'd better come inside. The cabin was small but meticulously organized, with one half clearly serving as the doctor's examination room. He gestured for them to sit at a small table in the living area. I remember the attack victim clearly, Dr. Finch began. He was in terrible shape when they brought him in, gunshot wound to the shoulder, head injury, half drowned. Truthfully, I didn't expect him to survive the first night. Faith leaned forward, her heart racing. But he did survive, he did. Strong constitution. The doctor adjusted his spectacles. But the head injury was severe. When he finally regained consciousness 2 weeks later, he had no memory of who he was or what had happened to him. Did he have a scar above his right eye? Faith's voice trembled. Dr. Finch considered this. Yes, I believe he did. Small, like you'd get from hitting your head on something sharp. Faith's hand flew to her mouth. It's him. It has to be. Where is he now? The doctor's expression grew troubled. He stayed here nearly 3 months, recovering. I tried to help him regain his memory, but nothing seemed to work. He became despondent. When he was well enough to travel, he left with a group heading north. North to where? Blake asked. They were bound for Montana territory. A man named Garrett had a ranch there, offered him work and a fresh start. Dr. Finch sighed. I'm sorry I couldn't do more for him. He was a good man, just lost. Faith felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her. After months of uncertainty, she finally had confirmation Michael was alive. But he was also gone, living a new life with no memory of her or their life together. Did he leave anything behind? She asked. Anything at all? Dr. Finch rose and went to a small desk in the corner. After a moment of searching, he returned with a folded piece of paper. He asked me to keep this in case anyone ever came looking for him. Said he didn't know who might search, but if someone did, they should have this. Faith took the paper with trembling fingers. Inside was a rough sketch of a house, their house, with a woman standing at the gate. The likeness was unmistakable, though Michael had never been much of an artist. He drew this, she whispered. Dr. Finch nodded. Said he'd been having dreams of this place, this woman. Couldn't remember who she was, but felt she was important. Tears filled Faith's eyes. He remembered me, not consciously, but he remembered. Where exactly in Montana? Blake asked, his voice gentle. Do you know the name of the ranch? Circle G, I believe, near a town called Whitefish. Blake nodded. I know the area. It's about a week's ride from here, maybe more. Faith folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Thank you, doctor. You've given me more hope than I've had in months. Outside, Faith took a deep breath of the cool afternoon air, trying to calm her racing thoughts. He's alive, Blake, she said, wonder in her voice. All this time I was right. You were. Blake smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. What do you want to do now? Is that even a question? We go to Montana. Faith looked at him in surprise. Unless, do you not want to continue? Blake placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Faith, I promise to help you find the truth, and I will. But I need to be certain this is what you want. Of course it is. Michael is my husband. I love him. I know. Blake's voice was soft. But he's not the same man who left Copper Creek. The doctor said he has no memory of his past life. Of you, are you prepared for that? Faith stepped back, suddenly angry. What are you suggesting? That I abandon him because he's injured, because he might not remember me right away? No, of course not. Blake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm just asking you to consider what lies ahead. If seeing him a man who looks like your husband but doesn't know you might cause more pain than resolution. I have to try, Faith's voice broke. Wouldn't you if you were me? Blake's expression softened. Yes, I would, and I'll take you to him if that's what you want. It is. Faith took a steadying breath. Thank you. They purchased additional supplies at the trading post and prepared to leave the next morning. That night, as they camped a few miles north of the settlement, Faith found herself studying Blake's profile in the firelight. What was it like? She asked suddenly. When your memory returned, Blake looked up from the fire. Disorienting, like waking from a dream to find yourself in a strange place, only to realize the strange place is actually your home. Were you happy to remember who you were? Blake considered this. Parts of it, yes. Other parts, I almost wish I could have left forgotten. The war, he nodded. And what came after, the emptiness of returning home to find everyone gone. Faith moved to sit beside him. I'm sorry, don't be. Without those experiences, I wouldn't be who I am now. Blake's gaze met hers. I wouldn't have been in the right place at the right time to meet you. The honesty in his eyes made Faith's heart catch. Blake, I know, he smiled gently. You love your husband, as you should. But I care for you too, Faith admitted. These past weeks, you've become important to me. And you to me. Blake looked back to the fire. Which is why I'll see this through. Whatever happens in Montana, you won't face it alone. Faith reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you. The journey north was arduous but determined. They crossed from Wyoming territory into Montana, the landscape growing more mountainous as they traveled. Faith grew quieter with each passing day, her mind consumed with what lay ahead. What would Michael be like now? Would there be any recognition in his eyes when he saw her? The drawing gave her hope that somewhere, deep inside, he remembered her. But Dr. Finch's words haunted her despondent, lost. On the 7th day, they crested a hill to see a valley spread below them. A small town nestled against the mountains, with scattered ranches dotting the surrounding countryside. Whitefish, Blake confirmed, and that must be the Circle G. He pointed to a large property to the east of town, marked by a distinctive barn with a painted symbol on its roof. Faith's heart pounded in her chest. He's there, after all this time. We'll reach it by evening, Blake said. Would you rather rest in town first? Faith shook her head firmly. I've waited 6 months, I won't wait another night. The Circle G ranch was larger than Faith had expected, a sprawling operation with several outbuildings, corrals, and a main house built of sturdy logs. As they approached, men working in the yard paused to watch their arrival. A tall man with gray at his temples stepped forward as they dismounted. Afternoon, something I can help you with? I hope so, sir, Blake replied. Are you Mr. Garrett? I am, Thomas Garrett. The rancher looked them over with a practiced eye. Don't get many visitors this time of year. Faith stepped forward, her legs unsteady after the long ride. Mr. Garrett, I'm looking for my husband. I believe he's working for you. Garrett's eyebrows rose. Is that so? What's his name? Michael Sullivan, though he may not be using that name. He was injured 6 months ago, lost his memory. Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. You're talking about James, at least that's what we've been calling him. Dr. Finch's patient, Faith's breath caught. Yes, that's him. Garrett studied her face, then nodded slowly. He's out with the herd today, should be back around supper time. His expression softened. He's a good worker. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, still doesn't remember much, far as I can tell. May we wait for him? Blake asked. Of course. Garrett gestured toward the house. My wife will get you something to eat. You look like you've had a long journey. Inside, Mrs. Garrett, a kind-faced woman with capable hands, fed them a simple meal and showed Faith to a washroom where she could freshen up. Looking in the mirror, Faith hardly recognized herself. The journey had left her son browned and weary, her dress dusty from the trail. I have a clean dress that might fit you, Mrs. Garrett offered, noticing Faith's concern. If you'd like to change before your husband returns. Faith accepted gratefully. The borrowed dress was plain but clean, a soft blue that brought out the color in her eyes. She washed her face and hands, then twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she rejoined the others, Blake looked up from his conversation with Garrett, his eyes widening slightly. You look lovely, he said quietly. Faith managed a nervous smile. Thank you. As the sun began to set, the sound of approaching riders drew them outside. A group of men on horseback entered the yard, leading a small herd of cattle into a nearby corral. There he is, Garrett said, pointing to a rider at the back of the group. Faith's heart nearly stopped. Even at a distance, she would know that silhouette anywhere the way he sat in the saddle, the set of his shoulders. Michael, he dismounted smoothly and led his horse toward the barn, not yet noticing the visitors standing on the porch. Faith started forward, but Blake caught her arm gently. Let him get settled first, he advised. A shock like this at the end of a long day. Faith nodded, understanding Blake's concern but hardly able to contain herself. She watched as Michael, or James, as they called him here, removed his horse's saddle and began brushing the animal down with practiced motions. When he finally emerged from the barn, he paused, noticing the strangers. His gaze swept over Blake, then settled on Faith. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a flicker of something: confusion, recognition, uncertainty crossed his features. Faith stepped forward slowly. Michael, he frowned, walking toward her with cautious steps. Do I know you? The voice was his, but the emptiness in his eyes broke Faith's heart. Yes, she said softly. I'm Faith, your wife. Michael stopped a few paces away, studying her face intently. Wife, he shook his head slightly. I'm not. You are Michael Sullivan, Faith said gently. We have a homestead in Copper Creek, Wyoming territory. We've been married for 3 years. Michael's face contorted with effort. I don't remember, I'm sorry. Faith reached into her pocket and withdrew the folded drawing. You drew this. Dr. Finch gave it to me. Michael took the paper with hesitant hands. As he unfolded it, his breath caught audibly. I've dreamed of this place. And this woman? He looked up at Faith. You? Yes. Faith fought back tears. Me. For a long moment, Michael stood frozen, looking between the drawing and Faith's face. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped back. I'm sorry, he said, his voice strained. I need time. Before Faith could respond, he turned and walked rapidly toward one of the bunkhouses, leaving her standing alone in the yard. Mr. Garrett approached and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Give him time, Mrs. Sullivan. It's a lot to take in. Faith nodded numbly, watching Michael's retreating form. She had imagined many scenarios for their reunion, but not this, not him walking away from her. Blake moved to her side. Are you all right? No, she admitted, but I will be, Mrs. Garrett showed them to a small guest cabin where they could spend the night. Blake offered to sleep in the barn, but Faith insisted there was room enough for both of them to maintain propriety. I don't want to be alone tonight, she confessed as they settled in for the evening. Blake nodded, preparing his bedroll on the floor while Faith took the narrow bed. He'll come around, Faith, it's just the shock of it. What if he doesn't? The question that had haunted the back of her mind for days finally emerged. What if he never remembers? Then you build new memories, Blake said simply. If you love him, and I know you do, you'll find a way. Faith lay awake long into the night, Blake steady, breathing the only sound in the small cabin. When dawn finally broke, she rose quietly, hoping to find Michael before the day's work began. She found him sitting alone on the porch of the bunkhouse, a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded but no longer hostile. May I join you? She asked. He nodded, moving aside to make room on the bench. They sat in silence for several minutes before Michael spoke. I dreamed about you last night, about us. He kept his gaze on the mountains in the distance. We were dancing in a room with yellow curtains. Faith's heart leaped. Our first home in Kansas had yellow curtains. We danced there the night you proposed. Michael turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. Tell me more, please. So Faith did. She told him about their courtship in Kansas, their decision to move west, the struggles and joys of their first years in Copper Creek. She told him about his love of horses, his skill with a lariat, the way he whistled when he worked. As she spoke, Michael watched her with intense concentration, as if trying to match her words to the fragments in his mind. And you never believed I was dead, he said when she finished. Even when everyone else did. Never, Faith confirmed. I would have known. Michael looked down at his hands. I wish I could say the same, that I somehow knew you existed, were waiting for me, but the truth is I didn't. I've been living as James these past months, trying to build a life from nothing. The pain in his voice cut through Faith. That's not your fault, Michael. You were injured, confused. I still am. He met her gaze. I look at you and I see the woman from my dreams. I hear your stories and they sound like tales that happened to someone else. But I don't feel what a husband should feel. I don't remember loving you. Faith fought back tears. What are you saying? I'm saying I need time. Michael's voice was gentle but firm. You've come all this way and I owe it to us to try, but I can't simply pack up and return to a life I don't remember. I understand, Faith said, though her heart was breaking. What do you want to do? Stay, for a while. Michael glanced toward the main house. Mr. Garrett says you and your friend are welcome here as long as needed. Get to know me, the person I am now, and give me a chance to know you. It wasn't what Faith had hoped for, but it was more than she'd feared. All right, we'll stay. Over the next week, Faith and Michael spent time together between his work duties. She told him stories of their past, showed him the wedding ring he'd given her, described their homestead in detail. Sometimes, something would spark a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Other times, he would listen with polite interest, like a man hearing about strangers. Blake kept a respectful distance, helping around the ranch to earn their keep but giving Faith and Michael space to reconnect. Faith noticed how he watched them together, his expression unreadable. One evening, as Faith sat on the porch of the guest cabin, Blake joined her. "How is it going?" he asked. Faith sighed. "Some days are better than others. He remembers fragments, mostly images, feelings, nothing complete. And you, how are you holding up?" "I don't know." Faith looked out at the mountains, painted gold by the setting sun. "Part of me is overjoyed just to have found him alive. Another part grieves for what's lost," Blake finished softly. Faith nodded, tears threatening. "He looks at me like I'm a stranger, Blake. Worse, like I'm someone he's obligated to but doesn't want to be." Blake was quiet for a long moment. "Faith, I need to ask you something difficult." She turned to look at him. "What is it? If Michael never fully remembers, if he chooses to stay here as James, what will you do?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't imagine going back to Copper Creek without him, but I can't stay here forever either, watching him struggle to remember loving me." "You have choices," Blake said gently. "You always have choices." Faith met his gaze, understanding the unspoken offer in his words. Over their journey, their friendship had deepened into something more. Feelings neither had acted on out of loyalty to Michael. "I made vows," she said simply. Blake nodded. "I respect that. I just want you to know that whatever you decide, you won't be alone." The next day, Faith found Michael by the corral, watching the horses with a contemplative expression. "Penny, for your thoughts," she asked, joining him at the fence. "Just thinking about what you told me. About how I wanted to raise horses someday." He gestured to the animals. "I feel at home with them, always have, even since the accident." "Some things are too deeply ingrained to forget," Faith observed. Michael turned to look at her. "Like the way my heart races when you smile." "Is that ingrained too?" Faith's breath caught. "What did you say?" "I may not remember our past, Faith, but I'm not blind." Michael's expression softened. "You're beautiful, kind, determined. Any man would be lucky to have you fight for him the way you fought for me." "I'm not fighting for just any man," Faith said. "I'm fighting for my husband." Michael reached out tentatively, touching her cheek with calloused fingers. "I wish I could be him for you, the man you remember." "You are him," Faith insisted. "Memory or no memory, you're still Michael Sullivan." He shook his head slowly. "Am I? The man you married would recognize the smell of your perfume, the sound of your laugh. He would know every inch of your face, every secret you've shared. I'm learning these things as if for the first time." Faith covered his hand with hers, keeping it pressed to her cheek. "Then learn them. I'll teach you everything." Something shifted in Michael's eyes, warmth, possibility. "I'd like to try." That evening, they walked together under the stars, talking of small things, the beauty of the mountains, the changing seasons, likes and dislikes. For the first time since her arrival, Faith felt as if they were truly connecting, not as husband and wife trying to reclaim what was lost, but as two people discovering what could be. When they returned to the ranch, Michael surprised her by taking her hand. "Would you ride with me tomorrow?" he asked. There's a place I've found, a meadow overlooking the valley. It's peaceful there, good for thinking. I'd like that, Faith replied, her heart lighter than it had been in days. From the porch of the guest cabin, Blake watched their return, noting their clasped hands. When Faith approached, he smiled genuinely. "Good night," he asked. "Yes," Faith couldn't hide her happiness. "We're riding out together tomorrow." "I'm glad." Blake's voice held no hint of jealousy, only genuine pleasure at her joy. "You deserve this chance, Faith." Faith impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for everything." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Michael arrived at the guest cabin early, leading 2 saddled horses. "Ready for an adventure, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, a playful light in his eyes that reminded Faith so much of the man she'd married. "Always, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, matching his tone. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills. Michael led the way confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. Finally, they emerged into a high meadow carpeted with late summer wildflowers. The valley spread before them in panoramic splendor. "It's beautiful," Faith breathed as they dismounted. "I found it my second week here," Michael said, tethering the horses. "Come here whenever I need to think." They settled on a flat rock overlooking the valley. Faith could see the Circle G below, tiny figures moving about the ranch yard like dolls. "I've been remembering more," Michael said after a comfortable silence. "Not complete memories, but flashes, feelings." Faith's heart quickened. "What kind of feelings?" "Happiness, safety." He turned to look at her. "Love." Faith hardly dared breathe. "Michael." "I remember a storm," he continued. "Lightning flashing outside a window. You were afraid and I held you until you fell asleep." Tears filled Faith's eyes. "Our first night in the cabin, a spring thunderstorm." Michael nodded slowly. "And I remember promising you something. That I'd always come home to you, no matter what." "You did," Faith whispered, "the day before you left for the cattle drive." Michael reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I'm sorry it took me so long to keep that promise." Faith looked down at their joined hands, his familiar and yet strange. The same strong fingers, but missing the small scar on the knuckle where he'd cut himself building their porch. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." Michael lifted his free hand to her face, gently turning it toward his. "Faith, I don't know if I'll ever remember everything, but I want to try. I want to know the man you loved, the man I was. And I want to know the man you are now," Faith replied, "if you'll let me." Michael's eyes searched hers. "What if he's not the same? What if you don't love who I am now? Then we'll build something new," Faith said with conviction. "Together." Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Michael leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a first kiss rather than one between long married partners. But as Faith responded, something sparked between them, familiar and new all at once. When they parted, Michael's expression was one of wonder. "I remember this," he whispered. "The way you taste like sunshine." Faith laughed through her tears. "You always said that. I never understood what it meant." "Neither do I," Michael admitted with a grin, "but it's true nonetheless." They spent the afternoon in the meadow, talking, sharing, rediscovering each other. When they finally rode back to the ranch, something had fundamentally shifted between them, a bridge spanning past and present. Blake was helping Mr. Garrett repair a wagon when they returned. He looked up at their approach, taking in their linked hands and the peace in Michael's expression. Faith met his gaze across the yard and nodded slightly, a silent message of gratitude and reassurance. That evening, after supper with the Garretts, Michael walked Faith back to the guest cabin. "I've been thinking," he said, stopping at the porch steps, "about Copper Creek, about our home there." Faith's heart quickened. "What about it?" "I'd like to see it." Michael's voice was steady, determined. "Not right away. I still have obligations here. Mr. Garrett's been good to me, and I owe him at least until the first snowfall, but after that, if you're willing to wait." "I'd wait forever," Faith said simply. Michael smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Mr. Garrett says I can have the small cabin by the creek. It would be more proper than you staying in the guest cabin with your friend." Faith nodded, understanding the unspoken question. "I'll move my things tomorrow." Michael took her hands in his. "Faith, I can't promise I'll ever be exactly the man you remember, but I want to try, for both our sakes." That's all I ask, Faith replied. Just try. He kissed her again, lingering this time before bidding her good night and walking toward the bunkhouse. Faith watched him go, her heart full of cautious hope. Inside the cabin, Blake looked up from the book he was reading. Everything all right? Faith sat beside him on the small sofa. Michael wants to return to Copper Creek after the first snow. Blake closed his book. That's wonderful news, Faith. He's offered me the small cabin by the creek until then, says it's more proper. He's right. Blake's smile was genuine though tinged with sadness. I should head back to Copper Creek soon anyway. Samuel will be wondering what happened to his new blacksmith. Faith reached for his hand. Will you tell them about Michael, if you'd like me to, please, and would you check on the homestead? Make sure everything's all right for when we return. Blake squeezed her hand. Of course. Faith studied his face in the lamplight, the kind eyes, the strong jaw, the quiet strength that had been her anchor these past weeks. Blake, I don't know how to thank you. Without you, I never would have found him. Yes, you would have, Blake contradicted gently. You're the most determined woman I've ever met, Faith Sullivan. You'd have searched the whole territory until you found him. Faith laughed softly. Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to do it alone. Blake's expression grew serious. Faith, before I go, I need to say something. What is it? I care for you, more than I should, given the circumstances. Blake's honesty was direct, without expectation. I won't act on it, would never ask you to choose between your husband and me. But I wanted you to know that what we shared on this journey meant something to me. Faith felt tears prick behind her eyes. It meant something to me too, Blake, in another life, perhaps. Perhaps? Blake smiled, lifting her hand to his lips for a brief, chaste kiss. But in this life, you have a second chance with the man you love. That's rare and precious. What will you do? Faith asked. After you return to Copper Creek, Blake shrugged. Live, work, find my own happiness. Promise me you'll try, Faith urged. You deserve it, Blake, I promise. He released her hand and stood. I'll leave the day after tomorrow, give you time to settle into your new cabin. 2 days later, Faith stood with Michael at the edge of the Circle G, watching Blake prepare to depart. He'd said his goodbyes to the Garretts and now approached them, hat in hand. Mr. Sullivan, he said, extending his hand to Michael. It was an honor to meet you, sir. Michael shook firmly. The honor is mine, Mr. Reynolds. Faith has told me what you did for her for us. I'm in your debt. No debt, Blake assured him. Just take good care of her. I intend to. Blake turned to Faith. Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Reynolds. Faith's voice caught slightly. Blake smiled, replacing his hat. I'll see to the homestead. Everything will be ready when you return. Thank you, Faith whispered. With a final nod, Blake mounted his horse and rode out, not looking back. Faith watched until he was just a speck on the horizon, a curious mixture of gratitude and loss in her heart. Michael's arms slipped around her waist. He loves you, you know. Faith looked up, startled by his perception. Michael, it's all right, he said gently. I saw it in his eyes when he looked at you, the same way I'm beginning to look at you myself. Faith leaned into his embrace. Nothing happened between us, I know. Michael kissed the top of her head. He's an honorable man, as I hope I am too. You are, Faith assured him. Both of you. As autumn deepened into early winter, Michael and Faith built a new relationship based on honesty, patience, and growing affection. His memories returned in fragments, a laugh here, a touch there, the smell of Faith's hair as she slept beside him in the small cabin by the creek. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when Michael would grow frustrated at the blank spaces in his mind, or when Faith would find herself missing the easy familiarity they once shared. But there were also moments of discovery, of connection that felt both new and timeless. By the time the first snow dusted the mountains, Michael had made his decision. I want to go home, he told Faith one evening as they sat before the fireplace. To Copper Creek, to our homestead. Faith's heart soared. Are you certain? I am. Michael took her hands in his. I may not remember everything about our past, Faith, but I know I want you in my future. Whatever we had before, we can build again, perhaps something even stronger. 2 weeks later, they bid farewell to the Garretts and began the journey south. The weather held, allowing them to make good time toward Wyoming territory. As they traveled, Michael would occasionally mention something he remembered, a landmark, a story Faith had told him, a fragment of their life together. Each memory was a gift, a piece of themselves returned. When they finally crested the hill overlooking Copper Creek, Faith felt a sense of completion she hadn't known in over a year. "There it is," she said, pointing to their homestead in the distance. Home. Michael studied the small cabin, the barn, the garden now dormant for winter. "It looks familiar," he said softly, "like a place I've seen in dreams." They rode down into the valley, approaching the homestead as the sun began to set. Faith was surprised to see smoke rising from the chimney, a warm glow in the windows. "Someone's there," Michael observed, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle in his saddle holster. "It must be Blake," Faith realized. "He said he'd make sure everything was ready for our return." Sure enough, as they approached, the door opened and Blake stepped onto the porch, a welcoming smile on his face despite the cold. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called. "Mr. Sullivan, welcome home." They dismounted, and Blake came forward to take the reins of their tired horses. "Thought you might appreciate a warm house and hot meal after your journey." "That was thoughtful of you," Michael said, helping Faith down from her horse. "Thank you." Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. The roof no longer leaked, the windows had been resealed against winter drafts, and a pot of stew bubbled on the stove. Faith looked around in amazement. Everything was clean, repaired, ready for them to simply step back into their lives. "Blake, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Blake replied. "It was the least I could do." Michael walked slowly around the cabin, touching familiar objects, the rocking chair by the fire, the quilt on the bed, the hunting rifle mounted above the door. "I remember this place," he said, wonder in his voice. "Not everything, but it feels right." Faith exchanged a glance with Blake, her eyes shining with gratitude. "It is right." Blake cleared his throat. "I'll be on my way. Let you two settle in." "Nonsense," Michael said firmly. "It's nearly dark, and that stew smells too good to leave." "Stay for supper, at least." That evening, the three of them shared a meal at the small table. Blake told them about the town's reaction to the news of Michael's survival, disbelief, then joy, then eager anticipation of the Sullivans' return. "Sheriff Adams wants to hear the whole story," Blake said, accepting a cup of coffee. "And Martha Green is organizing a welcome home gathering at the church." Michael laughed. "Sounds like I was well liked." "You were," Faith confirmed. "You are." As the evening grew late, Blake rose to leave. "I've prepared the old trapper's cabin about a half-mile south for myself. It's comfortable enough until I can find more permanent lodgings in town." "You're staying in Copper Creek, then?" Faith asked. Blake nodded. "Samuel still needs a blacksmith, and I've grown fond of the place." After Blake departed, Michael and Faith stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. "He's a good man," Michael observed. "Yes," Faith agreed. "One of the best I've known." Michael turned to her, taking her face gently in his hands. "Thank you, Faith. For not giving up on me, for bringing me home." "They called me widow too soon," Faith whispered, tears in her eyes. "I knew you were out there somewhere, and I was." Michael's expression grew tender as he pulled her close. "Now I promise you this: whatever memories I've lost, whatever time we missed, I'll give you years to come. A lifetime of new memories to replace what was taken from us." Faith rose on tiptoe, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home at last. "I'm going to hold you to that promise, Michael Sullivan." "I'm counting on it, Faith Sullivan." In the years that followed, Michael's memories returned gradually, some clear and vivid, others forever lost to the injury that had nearly claimed his life. But true to his word, he gave Faith years filled with love and new memories. They rebuilt their lives together, expanding the homestead into the cattle ranch they'd always dreamed of. 2 years after their return to Copper Creek, Faith gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, followed by a son 3 years later. Blake remained in town, becoming Copper Creek's most respected blacksmith. He found his own happiness eventually, marrying a young widow who arrived on the stagecoach one spring day. Though his friendship with Faith and Michael never wavered, it transformed into something different, a bond of respect and shared experience rather than unspoken longing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Michael took Faith back to the spot where he'd proposed a hilltop overlooking their now thriving ranch. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Blake hadn't helped you find me?" he asked as they watched the sunset. Faith considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, but then I remember something my father used to say, that life takes the shape it's meant to, even when the path seems darkest." Michael smiled, pulling her close. "Wise man, your father." "He would have liked you," Faith said, leaning into his embrace. "Both versions of you," Michael laughed softly. "Both versions, the man I married and the man who came back to me," Faith explained. "Different in some ways, the same in all the ones that matter. And which do you prefer?" He teased. Faith turned in his arms, her face serious. "I love the man you were, Michael, but I cherish the man you became, the one who chose to love me even when he couldn't remember why he should." Michael kissed her then, beneath the vast Wyoming sky, his heart full with the knowledge that some bonds transcend even the loss of memory, that love, true and steadfast, can be lost and found and built anew. "They called you widow too soon," he whispered against her lips. "And you gave me years to come," Faith finished, her smile bright in the gathering dusk. "Just as you promised."